Okay, we are live. Welcome to Esoteric Lectures. Today we have a little special guest with us that's going to join us in with some discussions that we're going to be going over here. And it's always good to have Shining on. Shining, if you wanted to give like a little, if you wanted to say hello to the people on Esoteric Lectures, you're more than welcome to maybe give a little back history on yourself if you feel so inclined, considering, this is a different channel than the ones that you've been, a part of. You're more than welcome to. And of course, we have Johnny with us. So we're going to dive into the topics here. So Shining, if you just want to say hello, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, greetings, gentlemen, everyone listening in. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be talking among such esteemed companies such as Johnny and Element. If you guys haven't heard of me before, I mean, there is a lot of new guys always coming in, but I used to have a channel called Shining Lights, which is what a lot of people still know me as. That channel was shut down, and I started this channel man out of time because people was wondering what happened to me. So I thought, out of courtesy, I'll make a video just explaining a few things. But yeah, me, Element, and Johnny, we've known each other for years. Previously, Johnny was just a commenter, and then he came out of the shadows and started adding to the content. But I think, it's been years now, isn't it? We've been doing this MGTOW manosphere now term monk thing going for years, and now you're on for the esoteric lectures. So I'm looking forward to seeing where and how this discussion develops.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Shining. Like you said, we've known each other and everybody for a long time, and I think it was in due time that we'd feature you on Esoteric Lectures, and it was something that we've been wanting to do for quite some time, and I think today is that time. So it's always good to have you on. Always good to talk to you, Johnny. Anything you want to say before we start?
Yeah, I'm Johnny Midnight, as always, and co-host of Esoteric Lectures, where all the good men have been taken. Shining, I'm really happy to have you, as I think you're our first guest we've ever allowed onto the show. So that's definitely a landmark for our channel. And we have a lot of things that we want to talk about tonight, especially what's going on in England right now. And we're going to have a little bit of a different perspective, I think, than what you might see on other manosphere or quote-unquote alt-right channels that you might be listening to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to go ahead and add in real quick here the list of topics here on the sidebar, so we have that in our peripherals while we go about doing this. Just give me 1 second here, and done. So a lot of things to cover today. I don't know how long we're going to run today. We're probably going to go a little over than our usual hour.
We usually do an hour, but today, with you as our special guest, with so many things to cover, it might go over. So if you're cool with that,
as long as it takes, gentlemen. As long as it takes.
Sit back and enjoy your favorite drink.
So we have a lot of topics here, and a lot of the topics that we're going to discuss are going to be revolving around things such as propaganda, social engineering, the androgynous West, and turning the tides on or controlled opposition. These topics are going to be going into a lot of recent events, news events that have been culminating to the surface, and what the side effects are. What are some of the agendas at play here? What are some of the things that tie into all of this that we might see? We will be discussing the Tony Robinson issue, and we'll be presenting a different take on it, at least myself personally, in my opinion about it. It probably will be an unfavorable one, because I see something a little different maybe than other people might, because everybody seems to be covering that issue, and they're all swaying in one way, and I'm going to kind of move it in a different direction because of what I see. And we're also going to be going over finding information in the difficult age of censorship these days, and how to get that information. It's becoming more and more difficult. Johnny will also be going over the Johnny, you wanted to cover the history or the structures of the UK, right?
Right, yeah, English culture, British culture in the 21st century, and how it differs from the U.S. And
Okay.
I want Shining's perspective on that because that's where he lives. So.
Okay, and then finally we'll be going over some more of the side effects of the Tony Robinson issue that might be culminating and what we might see out of the public moving forward. So let's get started. Shining, we're going to start off with your list here. Let's dive right into number one, which is Western propaganda archetypes. So Shining, I mean, what kind of motivated you or wanted to discuss this topic? I know that we have a lot of propaganda moving forward, and what was something that you that caught your attention specifically about propaganda that kind of led you to want to bring this up?
I think it's just the fact, like, in fact, it all ties in. I mean, everything you mentioned all ties in with the propaganda that we're listening and we're manipulated by, and we're bombarded by. From the marketing of products and services, we see more and more being invasive within our phones, within the you see on your, what do you call them over here? We call them posters, but I think over in the US you have another word for it. But and then also on the news as well. And I think the more people latch on to the fact that we are in this matrix, we are being lied to, the more alternative media gets more popular. But the longer that goes on, the more alternative media drifts onto the old propaganda archetypes, that of being what the agenda is, what the political agenda is, what the economic agenda is, and what and the general dynamics of a culture, of a society generally. I mean, they've got this great saying, like, whenever an event happens, you see who benefits from the most of it. But I've been watching RT for some time. I've been listening to people like George Galloway, listening to what's his name, David Icke. I've been listening to I don't listen to Alex Jones anymore, but yeah, all that stuff with Joseph Watson and Stephen Molyneux and what's that name, Thunder, for all those guys. They all seem to be drifting more and more towards what the mainstream propaganda is. So I've finally gone back to watching CNN, BBC. I mean, if I'm going to be lied to, and I need to sift out what's true and what's false, I might as well see what the mainstream. Basically, what I'm trying to say is it's all mixed in together, and now you just don't know who to believe and what to believe. I mean, a lot of the guys I used to rely on for alternate media, they're now saying the same stuff.
Yo, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, I was in a private hangout with Element and I believe it was RPG, and we were talking about the structure of Lauren Southern and Brittany Pettibone, and how the cost of what it took for them to produce these interviews and these films that they do, as they basically live up in a jet airplane. Who is funding this? I mean, if Lauren Southern is banned from Patreon and Brittany Pettibone makes $800 off of Patreon a month, you can't afford that on just that kind of a shoestring budget. Not the cameras, the lighting, the travel, the accommodations. I really am very interested in wondering what corporation, and I do say corporation, is buttering their bread, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were discussing how much it cost, just basic. I think, Johnny, you were mentioning that one of their events that they filmed was filmed on like the Red camera.
Yeah, the Red camera.
And that camera, like the low end price of a camera like that is about $20,000. That doesn't include
just for the base of it, just for the base, not the screws or the lenses or the foggers or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a low end version. The higher end version is about 60 grand. The lenses each are about $2,000 to $3,000, and that doesn't include the lighting, the sound, or any of that stuff. So Johnny's point there is, these people, which ties into your point here, Shining, about Western propaganda, and you're like Johnny said, and like I'm going to say, you're exactly correct, because when we look at alt-right media and news, this is why I don't pay attention to any of these people anymore, because it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just an extension of mainstream news television. And that was all done intentionally. That wasn't by accident. These people put their people in these positions to be these, Lauren Southerns and people to convince the public that they're apart from the mainstream news media, but in reality, they're being funded by the very same people. It's just, like an offshoot of mainstream news media, and that's all done by design, of course.
Just like World War II was funded, both sides, all three sides were funded by families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds.
I think two things, two archetypes people will understand and will know of already is the first agenda of why somebody would be a journalist, would propagate a certain message. The first one would be that they want the truth to come out. So you get the whistleblowers, you get the guys that genuinely and sincerely want to either better themselves or better humanity. So they'll be desperately trying to get some truth out, or try to learn some truth, which is what the journalism was supposed to be, right? Well, that's how it used to be. And the second one is the selfish agenda, meaning for either for power or for wealth. That's another reason why people would want to get a message out. So if for example, the US government, they want to invade Vietnam, they want to invade Iraq, all of a sudden they're demonizing the Vietnamese, all of a sudden they're demonizing the Iraqis, or they're demonizing the Russians. I mean, that's pretty transparent, but even then people get fooled by that. I mean, again, people being fooled by the Russian rhetoric. Now all of a sudden Russia's a danger again. You see, these two archetypes, I think it's oversimplified, but basically, I think they're the two main archetypes: the people that generally want to get the truth out, and the people that have an agenda, have a political power or a wealth agenda. And I think if you understand those two archetypes, you can begin to understand where people are coming from. And I think people need to consider not only what the message is, but who's saying it when it comes to news, when it comes to propaganda, when the people are telling you who's good, who's evil, what's good for you, what's bad for you. I think people need to consider whether this person generally wants the truth out, or he's trying to sell you something or get you to do something.
Shining, honestly, I think a lot of the quote-unquote alt-right media, or this alternative media, falls into the latter category. They want their Patreon tokens, and they realize that people are fed up, and they think that if they can tell them what they want to hear, they're going to be paid for it.
Sorry, just quickly. What's interesting is, and also what people need to consider, is that intentions can change. So, for example, now we're getting MI5 whistleblowers. We're getting CIA, top ex-intelligence officers coming forward. So they originally were paid by the government to their job was to propagate the government's message. Now they've come forward and they seem genuinely to want to tell some truth, to want to blow the lid on some wrongdoing. So there's an example of how someone with a selfish agenda can have an altruistic agenda, and vice versa. In fact, sure. we've seen ourselves. We know men ourselves that came from the MGTOW community, and they originally appeared to have an altruistic helping men message. And then when the money started coming in, all of a sudden they started to change. All of a sudden their message started to change. So people need to bear in mind that people can change. People's agenda, people's intention can change from one archetype to another.
Well, just to let everybody know who's listening in, we here at Esoteric Lectures are in this only for the money.
Obviously.
Right. It's all about the money, and how dare you that you did not donate already.
But it's all part of the matrix. You know, when we talk about the matrix, this is what I would say. This is one of the core weapons of the matrix, is the perception deception. Obviously, it all starts with the propaganda. They create this environment to make you believe a certain way, to make you hate a certain people, or to love a certain thing, or you know,
Right.
that's how you can get that's why people, they get addicted to things that are completely bad for them, or they hate something which they need, in fact.
It's just like 1984 by George Orwell illustrated the what was it? The 2 Minutes of Hate. Well,
Well, it was actually it was
Yeah.
called reality control, is what it was,
Hmm.
and the reality control was all based upon making sure that the wars that were going on in 1984 with Oceania and Eurasia and all these different places were all under the guise that there was a real war going on, and what they were doing is dropping fake bombs in an empty field next to the city, and they would not allow people to leave that,
those confines, right?
because they didn't want people to see past that fake world or city that they were living in. And the whole thing about going back to the propaganda of the alt-right, and what we're seeing manifesting now, is all about reality control. They want, the whole purpose for, like you were saying, Shining, to interject these agents in places is so that people's reality, or where I like to call it perception manipulation, is completely controlled, because people will believe one thing, and that will sway how the public move. And so they have to have those people there in order for them to maintain the propaganda. And if they allowed any kind of alternative media without their control, then the whole point of the propaganda machine would be null and void. And so I think a lot of that is because of what we're seeing with the alt-right being an extension.
It cannot be emphasized enough just how powerful the perception deception is. But so many, in fact, if I may just delve into popular culture a bit. I remember watching this film. It's a very popular film. You guys will all know this film, but I think for this podcast, we'll try our best not to name drop. It's a very popular film. I remember there was this line, and the line went, you'll be surprised about how many of the truths we hold so dear are all part of perspective. And I remember thinking at the time, that's utter rubbish. It's like there's fact and there's fiction, there's truth and there's falsehood. But to so many of us, the things that we believe in, our religion, our culture, our superiority, our nationality, our borders, what we think is good, what we think is evil. So many of those things are our perception. In fact, it's something we talk about around the manosphere for a long time, and that's sexual need. The fact that the orgasm is all in your head. It is all in your head, and the fact that you can have an orgasm without even touching a woman. It should make you think, what other things that are in my head? What other things that I think that are a necessity, that I take for granted, that I think is harmful for me, or I think will benefit me. How many of those things are in our head? So we cannot underestimate the power of propaganda. And the fact is, it makes men go to war. It makes men murder. It makes men go into recluse. It makes men suicidal. Your perception of your world and of yourself and of your environment very much affects how you act and the things you believe in.
Well, I mean, one of the things to do to combat that, though, too, is to change your state of mind, and only through education, through knowledge. I'm talking about real learning. Be a student, not a pupil. Can you attain that different level of knowledge and preserve yourself while you're alive through all of this? And you're going to be alive through all of this from birth to death. This is not going to go away. This system is going to remain, and it's going to be maintained. I hate to say.
that also ties in along perfectly with the direction of social engineering. Everything that you just mentioned there, Shining, is directly related to social engineering and propaganda, and what they tell and influence through propaganda obviously is social engineering, because it will direct the ways and behaviors of the public, you know. And when we look at all, like, let's say, for example, alt-right or the Patriot movement or any of these type of offshoots of that, we can see, and this might be an unpopular viewpoint, but any kind of group that you're a part of will be manipulated. It's just how they make sure that they keep control over people. And what we see, like with people that are willing to be very patriotic, is the nature of what they're trying to do is not wrong. It's a good, noble cause. But what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that what is the main factor amongst all of groups that want to stand up for, you know, for freedoms and stuff like that, and it's for people to start a war and go to war with people. Well, that's exactly what they want. They want people to go to war, because that's a perfect way to control the population for many different reasons, for destabilization or for whatever. So that's something that people have to always remember, is that any group is used.
That's a perfect segue into our a second topic, which you mentioned, social engineering, which is where propaganda leads to. It leads to your identity. It leads to how you view yourself. Now, people have to understand that those on top, those on the very top, those people in power, those people that not have a lot of money, those people that print the money, those people that press buttons and all of a sudden their bank account has billions, those people, they'll stay in power by any means necessary. And lying is just one of their tools. Propaganda is one of their tools. And obviously, to keep it, to stay in power, you need to wipe out any competition. You can't be having the people rising up and demanding their rights. And on the micro scale, that means men are disposable. You know, men are taught that their only value is what they can contribute to other people, or contribute.
Sure, of course, absolutely, Shining. Take a look at, like, say, a major conglomerate like YouTube. Okay, today is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, gentlemen. But look at it this way: when it's Mother's Day, YouTube has, fucking, it's all pink and there's a bunch of vaginas all over the place and hearts and things. There's nothing on YouTube dedicating the symbology of fathers to promote that, because why? They think that we men, we fathers, are disposable.
Yes, yeah, and that's
notice that.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that's why that's a perfect example there, Johnny, because my Bible that I like to call 1984 and Brave New World. I mean, those are my books I go to for.
Yeah, that's your Old and New Testaments.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because the books, I mean, those books are directly from social engineers. Orwell and Huxley were social engineers, and they were scientists, and they studied human behavior and for the reasons of moving the future into a certain direction. And like you said there, Johnny, they're trying to eliminate the family unit and completely rewrite the norms of the way that the old age used to be, to usher in the new age, which ties into our third topic, which we're going to go back and forth between social engineering and our third topic.
Of course.
They go hand in hand, which is that they want to move the society towards this androgynous age.
Right, the age of Aquarius. It's been programmed that we have to go into it, and that age of Aquarius is, even though, as some commenters have said, Aquarius is male. Well, yeah, he is, but the age itself is feminist. I'm not just talking about gynocentric. The species is gynocentric. Always has been, always will be. We can't change that. It's same thing with wolves and foxes and other hippopotami. all these mammals, they're gynocentric. That's not going to change. But when you talk about feminism, though, when you call God her or she, that's what we're going to be looking at in the next 100 years, I bet.
You know, we were just looking at a video game from the E3 conference that came out, and one of those games was based on looking at the future, and it was that very much a Blade Runner, as we've covered before on this channel. You know, Blade Runner is very much a marker of a future that we could see and probably and will see,
and Blade Runner 2049 even more so.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and the point is jumping back to social engineering and how that relates to, you know, the androgynous Wesh. Was once Shining comes back here, we'll rehash on that so he can have his 2 cents on it.
Right.
But you know, this is very much social engineering, and like you said, Johnny, they're taking out the importance of fathers. They're rewriting the family's dynamics. The question we need to ask ourselves here, and I think it was mentioned in Huxley's Brave New World, but what is the purpose of doing that? You know,
right. What is the motive?
The purpose is that, you know, they want to, and what Huxley described is that they want to grow babies in test tubes. They want the children to be controlled by the state, which they already have been. I mean, that's what all of this, you know, child protective services is all about. And it goes even more devious and really evil stuff like child trafficking. I mean, that's what that's all about.
And the thing is that they, even though the state is rearing the children by and large now, the whole baby mama phenomena, if you have test tube babies, it's going to be so much easier because it's going to be the rule. It's going to be the basis.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that will be the new standard of how people are, how people will become in their attitudes and behaviors. It will all be controlled exactly like a science. And when you look at social engineering, you know, when we look at where they've been taking us the last 10 years or so, it's all been moving towards, you know, this new age of this new world with no gender, androgynous people, androgynous kids, unfortunately. I mean, that's just doing that shit in Sweden right now. I mean, that's what all, you know, and another thing that speaking of social engineering is when we look at, and I think it was Huxley that mentioned this, he said that when you introduce sexuality at an early age, what happens is the mind, the brain basically rewires itself so that the children don't have the ability to form pair bonding correctly anymore. So, you know, let's say, for example, if one person and another person get together and they haven't had a long existing stand of relationships or, you know, hookups or anything, then the pair bonding or the survival aspect between a male and a woman mating is there for a reason to ensure that the child is raised correctly. Well, when you introduce sexuality at an early age, that rewiring, that natural state of how that is, you know, supposed to be is rewired. So, you know, we see a lot of women today that have had multiple sex partners, and they can't be in any kind of relationship because their brains have been rewired, because they have access to multiple people. So instead of this is your only person and mate or whatever, now you have a plethora of hundreds of thousands, and there's no stability left in the family at that point.
And the thing too, also, I think, is the free availability of pornography, which an 8-year-old can find, you know, some of the craziest stuff out of Germany and Japan for free on the internet. And, you know, when I was a kid, when I was 8 years old, you maybe found your dad's Penthouse or Playboy magazine, and you learned what boobies were. You know what I mean? And,
right.
and that was just a tiny sample of it, but it wasn't this repetitive, you know, all-encompassing and all-pervasive assault on the senses. You know, they do that even in the mainstream, like Carl's Jr. Hamburger commercials. You know, they're all about sex. It also preys on the male psyche, not just the female one, too.
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, everything in our society is over-sexualized. You can't even watch a frickin' hamburger commercial, like you said, without a woman eating it like she's doing something.
You know, spray your special sauce all over my boobs. You know, burger dude.
Ridiculous.
I mean, that's what it's become. And,
beer commercials, food commercials. Hell, I can't even watch a commercial with a bag of peas without seeing some horse crap.
Exactly, and they do that. So they do that. Yeah, you know, they do that deliberately. Even magazines that are mainstream that you get like right at the grocery store racks, like Cosmopolitan, for instance, they have as much nudity now as Playboy did back in 1982.
And what's interesting to note about this is the desensitization of what happens when you're constantly exposed to that stuff is that it doesn't have the same effect on you. It's like a drug. You get used to it after a while. And so what happens is when we look at the agenda of them wanting to, you know, 1984 talked about this. They want to move the reproduction and sexual aspect more into the lines of it being not as an important thing in terms of the way that, you know, humans feel about it. So in other words, when you introduce an over-sexualized country and you you know, like we were mentioning, every single commercial that you have out there is just full of this over-sexualized propaganda, then it desensitizes people to want to reproduce, and then people don't feel the need to anymore because they've been exposed to it so much. It doesn't you know, get them off anymore, so they don't want to reproduce. And that's another social engineering aspect to what we find with all this over-sexualization everywhere.
Well, yeah, that kind of answers the question I was about to ask. I mean, if they don't want us having sex, why are they constantly reminding us about sex? What is the motive with that? Well, like you said, it becomes a type of overstimulation, desensitization to the act and to the possibility of a mate. And I think that's why it makes it so easy for a lot of men, especially younger men, to go MGTOW.
Yeah, I think so too, because you get sick of it. I mean, you just get so tired of the degeneracy. And the thing about it also is that when you don't have that same type of stimulation, then you always have to go further and further. And then what ends up happening is you start falling into degeneracy. And then you have, you know, all the stuff we see now, and you know, with pedophilia and all this stuff. It's like they're trying to get people even more degenerate, and the only way that people can move down that path is to introduce that, I think. And I think that's probably what they're trying to do.
And we're not being moralistic busybodies here either. You know, we're not trying to be church ladies by any means. Right. We are criticizing this shift in advertising culture because we know exactly what the motive and the goal of it is, and why they're trying to, you know, why these production companies are making this kind of content. You know, it's crazy too, and it really does affect women a lot, to the point where there is a market for horse and dog dildos. You know, I mean, pardon my language, but there is. You know,
yeah.
People are making money off of that. Not even that. They have like dragon dildos and like mecha dildos and stuff. It's like,
it's insane. Yeah, Shining, I think you're back here. We were just going over the over sexualization and
we're talking about dildos.
What we were mentioning about is how we live in such an over sexualized society, and I was referring to Huxley's book there, and I think it was a statement that he had made at some point that said that when you introduce sexuality at a young age, what happens is the pair bonding aspects of people is no longer there. And so when we look at our society now, we have an over sexualization. So you know, the whole point in 1984 basically was to get people to stop reproducing, which they could then control by the state. And what a better way to do that than to over sexualize to the point where the stimulation is no longer there, so that people don't feel the want or the need to engage in that because they're constantly exposed to it. And Johnny made a point that was mentioning, you know, that's just why men go MGTOW, because we're sick of it. You know, you get so sick and tired of the same stuff over and over again because you're constantly hounded by it.
It's not why, but it facilitates MGTOW. It makes it easier.
It is amazing, don't you think, how things have become so acceptable to people? You know, how things that things get more and more sexually deviated. I mean, if you just look now, almost anything goes. Obviously, it's all come about. I mean, I'm one of those propagators that dropping religion completely has been a disaster. You know, dropping this point of there's no good, there's no evil, anything goes. I think this has been one of the worst things that have happened to society. This over atheism. I think they've taken atheism to be another religion, and one of those harms has seeped into the over sexualization and sexual deviancy. I mean, the fact that they're teaching sexual education to 5-year-olds now, and they're proposing teaching it to 2-year-olds as well, and the fact that now heterosexuality is now perverted, and now if you're not somehow doing something different than that, then somehow there's something wrong with you. Yeah, I remember a friend of mine. He come back from San Francisco. He says, if you're not gay there, you're weird. And now there's this transgender thing now where school kids as young as 9 approaching their GP with their mother and asking to have a sex change.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, I just showed you a couple of trailers for games, and people that try, people whose job is to try and predict the future, to have some realistic forecast of what's going on in the future. It's all transsexuals and robot fucking. That's that's the future. That's what we've got to look forward to. And the fact that it's now acceptable, and that's what people are looking forward to, and that's what turns people on. Surely that's an indication of where we're heading. I mean, I just go on.
I think that's a great segue into the androgynous West, and that's exactly what it is. We're seeing these, like you said, you had a friend that was in San Francisco. I mean, it seems to me like a lot of these cities are becoming their own little networks of where all this is going on. And like that game we were looking at, it was Cyberpunk 2077, where you have all this kind of androgynous, very gender neutral, nobody has an identity is the point mainly. They don't want people to have an identity. And that turns
the fact that they're pushing it into law, it's becoming law now that you are whatever gender you declare yourself to be. I mean, we joked about this. What was it, 2 years ago? How you could put on your card, your medical card, whatever gender you wanted, and the nurse or the staff, they had to address you by that gender. How can you do that without laughing? The fact is, it's becoming so mainstream now, and and it's happened so gradually that people just haven't noticed. People just have not known. And yeah, you mentioned it's amazing how our topics seem to go seem to connect from one way to another. But yeah, the robot. I mean, TFM is famous for selling robots, but the market, the robot market, the sexual robot market is booming. I think it's 10 times bigger now than it was 5 years ago.
Robot man, yeah.
I just saw. Obviously, I wasn't looking for it, but I just saw another advert for a sex doll. Just when I was researching these topics, and it's personally, it scared the shit out of me. I was looking at this new sex doll. It's another company. and they're making another sex doll, and it's a sex doll specifically for giving just blowjobs. And obviously, they try to make it as realistic as possible.
Shining, did you know that real women are actually using prosthetic breasts and butts? I'm not talking about implants. I'm talking about like over the body prosthetics to make them look more like sex dolls.
Mm.
Oh my God!
I'm not kidding.
John, me, you were talking about this. We were saying how in Japan, we used to find in the West how the Japanese had strange sexual fetishes. But if you see where the West is heading now, they're imitating the Japanese like for like. You know,
and look where Japan is right now. I mean, herbivore men were the forefront of anything. I'm not ragging on MGTOW by any means. I'm not giving it up, but they were the first to say, "Hey, let's just forego sex altogether because this has just become completely insane, and I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to spend my money on my hobbies and live my life that way throughout, until death."
Yeah, I wonder if American men and British men realize this. I wonder if they don't realize that how where Japan was, where we're heading towards. I mean, just as the Soushakuga Danshis, they had their monks, they had their pedophiles, they had their sexual fetishes, and they had their sex dolls. You know, Japan was the forefront of sex dolls, just as where we're heading now. All of a sudden, we're amongst the manosphere. We're having our sex doll sellers. We're having our transgenders. We're having our little kiddie fiddlers. You know, these are all coming out now. You know, and the fact that more and more people are expressing their sexual preferences, for lack of better words, shows.
You know, I just saw an article today, now that you mentioned that said sex robot will turn down steamy romps if not in the mood. Says here, sexbot Samantha ability to say no when demonstrated to an audience of stunned academics at one of the UK's leading science villages. So they're becoming more and more realistic.
Do you know what's funny? The argument or the discussion has already begun about whether or not robots have rights. It's already begun amongst students on universities and professors. They're already saying, well, what constitutes life? You know, if we can make artificial intelligence so advanced that
robots should never have rights. Never. I'm sorry. I'm gonna put my foot down on that. I'm gonna be a hardliner.
Yeah, but how often in the past did we say that? How often in the past did we say these people they're not going to get the vote, or this situation is never going to happen? And it did happen.
Well, yeah, you're right. It probably will.
I mean, that just comes to show you right there how, you know, they're pushing all this stuff. And I'm just reading this article, and it says here the robot has sensors hidden under her skin so she can respond to affection like a real-life human. She also has the revolutionary electronic brain, which puts her in charge in the bedroom. And they're also making male versions of these things too.
Is she going to be hypergamous too? Like she won't put out unless you buy her some new RAM. Oh shit!
I want that
make this up.
For my birthday.
Yeah, otherwise you're not getting any.
It was our anniversary yesterday, and you did not upgrade my system.
You did not upgrade to the latest software, 2.0.
You know, I mean, this is ridiculous, but you know, these people are going to buy into it, you know, and it's all about.
It sounds ridiculous to us, but how many of the things that are reality now, what was ridiculous 2 years ago?
Well, that's a great point, Shining, because as we see this progression of things like our social engineering, our propaganda, as well as, you know, the main topic we're discussing now, which is the androgyny aspect of it. They're every inch by inch, it's getting farther and farther down the line of what was considered completely absurd and wrong, and now they're pushing it even to the point where it's becoming the new normal. And so, what's going to happen 10 years from now? How far is it going to go there?
Here's the question, guys. Here's a question I'll put to you: is why where the first question is, what is their end game? What is their goal with all these agendas, with all this propaganda, with the pushing of the transgenderism, with the pushing of the of sexual promiscuity, with the pushing of destruction of the male role model, all this destruction? And the second question is, why are they doing it? You know, where is it heading, and why are they doing it?
Good question. What's the motive? Well, first of all, they need total compliance. Why do they need total compliance? Because they have to usher in a new age. They have to completely change the landscape of society to fit this vision of a new age. And unfortunately, like, we as men are not going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but why would they mix the genders? You know what? You know, I would call it gender confusion. You know what? Why
I think
would
it's
population control and also control of behavior.
I think part of it is that they're trying to move society towards a hive-minded system, and in order to do that, people can't have an identity in a hive-minded system. So when you introduce gender neutrality or neutrality, what happens is people all become on a base playing field. And so when you have a society of about 40 people and they all have an identity and they all have a gender, they're individuals, which means they can think for themselves and they have their own likes and dislikes. But when, like Johnny said, for complete control, in order for them to eliminate any kind of competition or any kind of one-upmanship that could not only get up on each other in that group, but also authority, they have to have everybody think the same, act the same, be the same at every level, from gender all the way up to their belief system. And I think what they're doing is moving that towards a hive-minded system.
Right, and we're in a process of conditioning right now. We're just in the middle of it. So it's going to keep going on and on.
All right, so you're asserting that the people in power, the elites, they want to reduce the population. What, in the West or in the world, do you think?
I would say in the world.
Yeah, it's a global thing. It's not just in the West. It's not just in the UK. They're trying to do this the whole world. And I think there's some places that, we look at like the poorer parts of Africa. Are they going to be gender neutral and do the same thing? In some cases, maybe, but in other cases, they're just too far gone. I think those places are going to be done away with.
Right. I mean, the thing is that's easier to get rid of them with bombs and diseases. Whereas a place like us, we're not just going to start lobbing scuds at each other. They know we're not going to do that. I'm not going to go and fly, a rocket from Wisconsin to Iowa because they're from a different state. They know we're not going to do that. So how are they going to be able to soften our reproductive rate? Well, they're going to have to do it a little bit sneakier. They're going to have to do it through social engineering.
Yeah.
I think, well, there's a couple of facts that support that theory. The first one is the fact that they're bombing the shit out of millions of people. That people are getting wiped out in their millions.
I mean, like, has anybody left in Syria?
Really? Yeah. I mean, literally millions of people have died over the past couple of invasions and wars. But I would say, not all the countries believe that, though. I mean, first of all, why would they bomb these countries and then open these countries up to let them into their own country? It's very strange. And also, you guys must know that during Chairman Mao's reign, he propagated a large population, which is why China has such a large population now. So I wouldn't say it's the universal philosophy amongst all the ruling elites concerning the transgenderism and the promotion of sexual other sexual deviancies. I would say they're doing that because that's what the elites are like. I would say the elites, the people at the top, they're so sexually messed up that this is just part of their environment. I think they're promoting amongst the masses what they themselves are like. That's what I suggest.
And you're correct. They are very degenerate, and they do instill that on the population because You know, they're like a virus. They're trying to assimilate their way of doing things on the public's way of doing things so that they can be like them, but under their control, you know?
I mean, to have birth control. I mean, to almost stop any more births going on. All they have to do is to stop child support, stop any monetary gain that people get when they have children. Because right now, I don't know about the US, but in the UK, you get a certain amount of money. Well, basically, the women get a certain amount of money for each child they have, regardless of their income. So you get money for each child you have, whether you're a billionaire or whether you're homeless. You get a certain amount. And if they just stop that, there'll be even less. I mean, right now, I mean, men are running away from the disaster that is getting controlled because you have a child to some woman, and now you're under the control of this woman and under control of the state. Men are running away from that, so birth rates are low anyway. If they just stop
Another
that
thing
money,
too is a couple of things too before we move on here, and then I'd like to touch upon the Tony Robinson stuff, which ties into your topic, Shining, about controlled opposition. But before I mention that real quick, there is something that I wanted to mention that you brought up, and that's that another aspect of population control is the whole homosexuality, because when you have two of the same sexes, obviously they can't reproduce. And when you make that the new norm, then the only way that they can have children is through artificial insemination. And that's exactly what 1984 wanted to move the society towards, which was to have the kids being controlled by the state. Well, in order to have artificial insemination done, that's regulated by the state, which is the medical aspect of all of that. And so when you have when you have a homosexual being the new norm society, then they can't reproduce kids, because then they just can't do it. So they have to have a way, if they wanted to have kids, which is artificial insemination, which can tie into Huxley's test tube babies, which means that they can genetically modify and manipulate the genomes in that to fit the society that they want. So, you know, you'll have a society where the only way you can have kids is through artificial insemination, which are test tube babies, genetically modified designer babies that the system will only want with certain genetics. Like, let's say, for example, you know, you're a gay couple and you want to go get a kid. Well, then they will either artificially inseminate a woman or some machine, whatever it is. And that, you know, if you want the alpha package and you want your, you know, kid to grow up to be the strong guy to work in the top executive branches, then you're going to have to pay a couple $100,000 for it. But if you want a beta kid, then you don't have to pay maybe $50,000. But you'll have, you know, each will come with a part.
The thing is that many women, when they go to the what's called the spermalog, they're not gonna they're gonna say, well, if I can't have the best, I'm not even gonna bother.
Yeah,
I mean, adding to your point, Element, something that we are seeing more and more these days is, you know, the single mother epidemic. The fact that the state is putting the children underneath the mothers, and what that has led to is that the state are having more control over the children. The fact is, women, they just cannot resist the state when the state says your child needs to have these vaccinations, your child needs to go to this school, your child needs to learn this, your child needs to act a certain way, to speak a certain way. It certainly does seem like the state wants to take complete control of how a child is brought up. But I would add that it's not entirely going to plan. If you see how the youth are being brought up, if you see this current generation, you know, the millennials, they're pretty fucked up. You know, I'm not sure that's what the state wanted. If you see the state of the kids these days, I'm pretty sure that's not what they wanted. Yeah, they're a lot more placid, but I mean, how productive can you be when you're, you know, when you're lazy?
Well, I think that's part of the population control aspect, is that, you know, I was listening to a gentleman that did a lecture back in the 70s that was discussing an event that he had attended of a guy that was on the inside of where the social engineers were planning on taking the world. And one of the things that he had brought up was the subject regarding health and mental well-being, mental, you know, health. And he said that the way that doing this is for those people that aren't, this is just the way that he put it, the way that the elites and the social engineers are trying to move things is that those that aren't smart enough to know to eat right, take care of themselves, and be healthy will be done away with. And those that are smart enough to survive will be the ones that are able to get the jobs and will be able to live. And so it might be shining that a lot of the millennial, like you were saying, the mental health of these people is that they made them that way to get it to be done away with them, to weed out the selectable alphas and the epsilons of Huxley's Brave New World philosophy. And
yeah, it could be eugenics.
yeah, eugenics.
It's not reduction. It's just like you said, separating the wheat from the chaff. And you know, just because you're MGTOW, especially if you're listening in, you're a young man, and you decided that you're MGTOW, does not mean that you're slop. Okay, does not mean that you are incapable of being able to do things that you want to do and succeed in them. And I'm not trying to do this as a pep talk. It's reality.
Well, one other thing I want to mention, and then let's move on, is the concept of contraceptions. This was another thing that was mentioned in the guy's lecture. And he said that back in the 80s, I think, or around the 70, 80 period, that contraceptives began to be more open out in the public. So like it used to be that you would go into a drugstore and it would be behind the counter and you'd have to ask for it. But what they did is they started putting it out in the open next to food, and gas stations have them, grocery stores have them. You can buy them and find them everywhere. And that was all by design so that people would always have it in the forefront of their mind. It was also for a psychological reason, which was that people would not feel embarrassed to ask for them when they would, think about, having sex. It would always be there and it'd be in the norm, so that increased sexuality would become the state, but it would also be in with always the forefront of contraception, which is the ability to prevent reproduction. So that was a population control method as well. I want to touch upon the Tony Robinson thing. So if anybody isn't aware of this, there's a guy in the UK that basically got arrested, and he was speaking out against the Muslim stuff that was going on in the UK. And this guy was an alt-right guy.
Actually, he was just reporting on a sentencing. He was not even reporting on a trial. That's it. It was like these Muslim men were being sentenced, and he was out there just, strictly reporting on what was going on. That's all. Okay,
gotcha. Well, anyways, what happened was the guy got arrested for that, and everybody, now Tony Robinson was an alt-right guy. And this is where I'm going to, spin this, because a lot of people are saying one thing, and I'm going to kind of move it in another direction, which might be an unpopular decision. But because we were discussing about the alt-right and propaganda, you always have to be suspicious with anything that they push on the public. And one of the things that I have a feeling about is that it could be that this guy was working for these people, and all this is just a big show to get people to, freak out and start rioting and lose their minds over something, and it's just another way of controlling the public. That's my take on it. It could just be another thing. And Shining, because you are in that area, I'd like you to maybe say something about that, if what your thoughts are.
Well, where do you want me to begin? You want the big version, or you want the short down version?
That's up to you, man. You do what you want.
There's so many points to point out. First of all, he was arrested because he was already out on license. He'd already committed a previous offense, and this warning triggered a suspended sentence. So he was sentenced for not just for doing this, but for something he did previously. Now, what people need to understand is, even anybody, you can't just stand outside a courtroom and start reporting on a case that's being read. You can't do that. Call it perverting the course of justice. Call it undue affecting the due process. The fact is, he was featuring people that were in the process of a court case, and you can't do that. In fact, due to his actions, those people that were being prosecuted, those people might get let off. The defense might call for mistrial.
Right.
Yeah, that's what he did, because he reported on people getting prosecuted during the process. They're going to call for a retrial
or a mistrial.
Yeah, a mistrial. And now the second thing is, reporting on Muslims. Okay, look, these 6-7 guys. What makes them Muslim? First of all, in fact, what's it now? 22 years I've been asking these guys. Any guy from the alt-right, any guy from the those people that criticize Muslims, I ask them, can you tell me what a Muslim is? Not in 22 years, not one of them has told me what a Muslim is. They think it's a brown guy. These 6 guys, they declared on their form. 2 of them declared on their form they weren't Muslim. When you get arrested, you fill out a sheet and they ask you what religion you are. 2 of these guys put no religion. So why is everyone saying, well, this is Muslim grooming gangs? Second of all, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, which is Tommy Robinson's one of his other names. He's made out to be some martyr against paedophilia, against child sex grooming. So why didn't he say anything about Lee McMillan? Why didn't he say anything about Richard Price? Why didn't he say no? Why didn't he say anything about Christopher Allen? These 3 people are friends of his. These 3 people are senior members of the EDL that he's mentioned on his Facebook.
Oh yeah, I heard about
these
that.
3 people are convicted child sex groomers.
Jesus.
Why didn't he say anything about them? He still hasn't said anything about them.
Yeah, see, that's my point. Everybody's freaking out about it, saying, "Oh, we have to defend this guy or whatever," but they haven't done the research. I mean, this is indicative to me of just another operation to get people to be, freaking out and start something, whatever that is, so that these people and the alt-right fall in line with what what this guy's saying. He's like trying to crusade people into some kind of civil dispute and some kind of civil altercations and get everybody to do that. What I think it is trying to single people out for resistance.
Stephen Yaxley Lennon is on the payroll of the Zionists, the Zionist agenda. This is something that's well documented. He was during during his late teens, he was your regular football hooligan, going around kicking people in the teeth because they didn't support the right football team. He was invited to Israel for a short stay. When he came back, all of a sudden he's this crusading against the Islamic invasion. All of a sudden he started talking like this. Now, if people were following him on his Facebook page during that stage, they'll remember there was a period a few years ago when he declared himself free from that. He started saying, no, Muslims are our neighbors. Muslims are just normal people like everybody. I condemn any racists that attack Muslims, that attack mosques. This video is still on Facebook. It's still floating about Facebook. During this period, the Zionist lobby dropped his pay. They stopped paying him, and then last year or the year before.
Wait, he's on the take for the Mossad, basically.
He's on the take. Guys, why don't you follow Stephen Yaxley Lennon from the beginning, and you'll see how it progressed. He's no martyr for white power. He's no martyr for white flight. He'd sooner kill a white man than if he was paid to than a so-called brown Muslim.
Yeah, well, there you have it, people. Don't
again. It's perception deception. People are. And the thing is, those that are allowed, I mean, it's a small number, but because they scream the loudest, they make all these soccer accounts and they're storming RT, they're storming all the YouTube videos, putting comments, free Tommy Robinson. So it's made to seem like oh wow, there's this guy, freedom of speech. Why didn't he speak out against it? His friends, when his friends were child sex grooming.
And this is my point here, and this goes into the second thing here, which is why, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to get information reliably, because there's so much deception out there. And as we move towards this age of, control, it's getting more and more difficult to get this kind of reliable information. But the thing is that people have to do their research. It's available, but people are lazy. They don't want to do that research.
Go search those names. Lee McMillan, spelled Leigh. Lee McMillan was a friend of Stephen Yaxley Lennon. He was on his Facebook page, and he was convicted of grooming a 10-year-old girl.
Jesus.
And then having sex with her multiple times. Go Google, go research Richard Price, a senior member of his EDL team, while he was the so-called leader of the EDL.
Well, I mean, also think, I mean, like, I've heard that the EDL is also really big into drug pushing too. So
I mean, the fact that so many people have been
they're a gang. They're not a political officer.
Go look up Christopher Allen, another member of the EDL. I don't know how. I think he's like 56-year-old. He was having sex with a 13-year-old girl.
Oh man,
a 13-year-old girl. That was that was the daughter of another member of the EDL.
Yeah, jeez.
Why didn't he speak out against that? In fact, nobody even knows it. People supporting Tommy, but they don't even know about these people.
Yeah, I mean, that just comes to show you right there, any time that they push anything in the mainstream news where people are all up in arms and you see all the alt-right people covering it, I immediately am
skeptical.
questioning. Yeah, exactly, because there's a reason why they want the public to do it, because it's propaganda and it's a lie. And all these people.
Okay, I have to add, guys, don't get me wrong. I think those guys caught kiddie fiddling in Rochdale, kiddie fiddling in Rotherham. Those Asian guys, yeah, they should go down. They should be sentenced. They should be. But the fact that you're saying, well, this is what Islam teaches, this is what Muslims do, it's false. It's a lie. Because most of these guys weren't Muslims.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing about the Catholics, whom I have no love for. But the thing is that not every Catholic priest is going to bang an altar boy.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're using this, I mean, you have to ask yourself, why are they selling this agenda? And it's because Israel is slaughtering Palestinians. The more you hate Muslims, the more slaughter they can get away with.
Again, the propaganda engine.
And the thing is, that people say, well, so what? These are just people. But it's listen. Do you guys not realize it comes home? All this shit comes home. When the Israeli security services started training the U.S. police, when all the weapons that weren't used in Iraq went over to the police force, who do you think suffered then? That's why the police force are just shooting people in the face and they say, "Oh, I thought he had a gun." This is why you reap what you sow. You have to realize that you're being manipulated on a wide scale, and it comes home. They call it the chickens come home to roost.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that just comes to show, we're moving towards this age. It's becoming more and more difficult to part of it is that people don't do the research, but I think also part of it is that the information is getting more and more tightly controlled for, people to find, because, it's like certain things that I find, like, it's hard for me to find good, reliable geopolitical information without it being a spin on, any of the alt-right people where it's about social justice this. It's just annoying.
To get anything, to get anything verascible, we have to go like deep underground, and it's kind of funny too. I mean, you take a look at Rebel Media, Ezra Levant, he's a Zionist. Take a look at Ben Shapiro, he's a Zionist. That they're all these alt-right figureheads, and again, who is buttering your bread? Follow the money. Where is it coming from? Well,
I think
Yeah,
it has to be pulled out. I think we have to point to the elephant in the room.
Right.
For some reason, so many of these deceptions, so many of this propaganda, it all seems to center around the Zionists. It all seems to center around Israel and how basically Israel is wiping out an entire nation for supplanting their culture.
Multiple nations.
Yeah. And now somehow they've got Saudi Arabia on board. What happened to Saudi Arabia being an enemy to America? Now, because they've signed an agreement with Israel, now the Saudis are okay now.
Yeah. Well, it's the Ministry of Truth. You know, they have their agents everywhere.
There's something going on over there. There's something going on. I don't claim to have all the answers, but for some reason, America and Britain is being cannibalized for the sake of Israel. You know, they're still pouring money in to Israel, despite the fact you've got millions of homeless over in the US. But for some reason,
I think the reason behind that is probably it's probably a biblical religious reason why they're doing that. There's something like you said, there's something going on over there that they have to do something, and I think it's on a level beyond politics. It's on a level beyond a war.
Well, it's esoteric.
Yeah, it's on that level. There is something beyond all of this stuff on the surface that's going on out there, and what that is, I don't really know, but I know it has to do with some, you know, on the level of the devil and possibly the Antichrist. I don't know. I'm not saying I do, but
there seems to be multiple agendas concerning Israel. The first one being money and power. Now, if you want to be president of the United States, if you want to be prime minister of the UK, you have to be pro-Zionist. You have to be. Donald Trump, 100%, he was pro-Zionist. In fact, he recently moved the US embassy to the occupied portion of Jerusalem, something that was contested for the longest time. Second of all, it's about money. The amount of companies that have made money selling weapons, equipment to Israel, and Israel selling, like I said, selling their training technique to the American police. You know, that I think that's why all of a sudden the police and the security forces have become so much more brutal in the past few years. Now, concerning the religious aspect, Zionism itself is based upon the theological assertion that the children of God, meaning that the Zionists themselves, they have a religious birthright to the land of Israel. Now, the Christian Zionists, which outnumber the so-called Jewish Zionists by a huge amount, they think that when Israel is established, meaning the Temple of Solomon is finally built, Jesus will return, wipe out the Jews and Muslims, and deliver the white Christian to the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's what they believe. Now, the Jewish Zionists, they believe, I'm talking about the religious ones. Most Zionists are atheists. Most Jewish Zionists are atheists. But the religious ones, they believe when the Temple of Solomon is built, the actual Christ, so they're actually waiting for Jesus themselves. They think the Jesus of Nazareth that came 2,000 years ago was a fake. They think building the Temple of Solomon will bring about their savior, will bring about the anointed one.
Right, the third temple. Actually, I do not think that many Ashkenazi or Zionist Jews actually are atheists. They use that as a front, but
but most
they go to temple.
Yeah, they go to temple, but I'm saying most people that call themselves Jews, just as most people that call themselves Christian, they're atheists. Let me ask you this: how many people that celebrate Christmas are Christians?
Fewer and fewer every year.
The fact is, people they practice this. People that they can practice the Sabbath. People they can practice Christmas and stuff like that. But when you actually ask them, do you believe in God? They say no. Do you read the Bible? Do you read the Torah, or do you believe? They say no. And it's same with Muslims. Believe, I've been talking to these guys for decades now. Most of them, they don't really believe in it. It's only when they're pushed. It's only when they say, oh yeah, all Roman Catholic priests, the pedophiles, all of a sudden, you trigger something within them. When you start saying, all Jews, they're responsible for all the evil that's going on. All of a sudden, all these previously atheistic Jews, all of a sudden they become religious. And that's the same with Muslims. When you start saying, oh, we need to kill all the Muslims, previously people that were just Pakistani or Arab or Indian, all of a sudden they become religious. When you start pushing people's buttons and you force them to take a side, that's when things start going, as they say, extremist. When you start pushing people to say, look, you're with us or against us. And unfortunately, I think that's the agenda for the podcast.
It's all about creating chaos that they feed off of, and that's a big tenet of why all this stuff that we see going on with volcanoes and earthquakes and all this stuff. It's about creating chaos that higher level aspects of what's going on feed off of. And I think a lot of that has to do with that. And the more chaos, the better. I think it's part of what this Tony Robbins thing was, is great chaos. The more chaos at any point that they can feel chaos, they want it. Because chaos is something that makes the world go round in a way. This world is based on chaos and entropy, as Johnny and I have said before. And that is, a main reason, of what makes this thing. It's controlled order out of chaos, and as Johnny and I have mentioned, these people are the stewards of this reality.
I think there's something to that, but because I was listening to somebody, and they were saying that the government create a problem, and then the government offer the solution. So then the government always keep themselves in the loop. It's like controlled opposition. It's
the Hegelian dialectic, exactly. I mean, the thing is that somebody like me who's out of the loop or element, we could write an album or a book or, a comic book or create a film, it's not, or even a podcast, and it's not going to do anything to change the perception of reality. However, if you do have that kind of backing, you are in that kind of club, you're able to create that kind of change. Now, like Ellen was saying, the people we were talking about are stewards of this reality. They have that ability, they have those resources, they have that know-how, and they're going to do what they can to not cure entropy, but treat it. You can't cure entropy. Entropy it's just a physical force that everything is going to rot. Now, the only thing
it's like trying to build a garden in the abyss.
Right. Yeah, pretty much. That's a great way to put it, actually. And, you have to maintain it over and over and over again.
Sorry, guys, I have to mention this, otherwise I'm gonna get into trouble now.
Okay.
I just mentioned about the Temple of Solomon. I have to mention the third option, the Orthodox Christians, or the Christian, the Christian scholars, the ultra Orthodox Jews, I should say, and the Orthodox Muslims. They have been preventing the building of the Temple of Solomon because they believe when that temple is built, the Antichrist will come.
Sounds like the Samsonite option to me.
Yeah, so that's the third one.
You ever heard of that before, Shining? The Samsonite option?
The Samson option. Yeah, oh boy. Oh boy. Okay, here's the thing. Every nuclear capable nation, from France to the United States, China, Russia, you name it, they have to disclose how many nukes do you have. The only nation on the earth that does not have to disclose that number is Israel.
Yeah, there's something going on there. There's something going on with that area of land. They seem to be outside of all international law. there's so much resources being poured into that from America and from America's allies. There's something going on there. There's no denying that. And the fact that it's been going on for 70 years now. 70 years.
I think I'm just going to take a wild guess, and because all of they're doing all this stuff in that area, I'm going to take a really wild guess, and it's not really that wild. That probably that's like the home of the devil, and that's why they're doing all that. Something's going to come out.
Well, a portal, yeah,
a portal into hell or something. That's where. That is probably where. And this just reminded me of something. There are 3 gateways to hell. If people didn't know this. One of them is in the desert, one of them is in the ocean, and one of them is in Jerusalem.
Wow.
So go figure that out. There's 3 portals to hell, one in the desert, one in the ocean, and one in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is right where Israel is at, if I'm not mistaken. Am I wrong?
I wonder where the desert one is. I wonder where the desert one is.
The desert, where did you say where it's at?
Yeah, I wonder where it is. It's probably like in Colorado.
Next to like the burger shop. Probably Area 51 or something. But and I want to move on here, and I want to go over just a couple more topics, and then I think we'll probably be wrapping this up here. Johnny, let's go ahead and talk about what you wanted to discuss, and then we'll sum that up with the final thing on this whole Tony Robinson thing and the social engineering and all the topics we've discussed.
Yeah, well, actually, it is linked to Tommy Robinson. It's about the culture in England, the geographical, I guess you could say, what's the word for it? The way information and culture is separated in England. So, like, for instance, in the United States, we do have like an East Coast, West Coast, and then all the flyover states. But it's not a cultural blockade for information. So I, living in Wisconsin, could create something, whether it's an app or a program or an album or a book or whatever have you, and still have a chance to get that out to the public just as well as I could in New York or LA. Now, in England, though, I had spoken with some of my friends in my personal business. That's not like that. There's very little opportunity to disseminate information, even with the internet. Just because so much of England is divided into provincial territories. Shining, what can you tell us about that? About that structure?
Yeah, I mean, I know me and you were talking about this before we went live, but that's something the rest of the world doesn't realize about the United Kingdom. We're not particularly united. Just because we've got one government, it doesn't mean we share the same culture. We share the same history. We have the same tastes. One of the main divides is what's called the North-South divide, and not only economically but culturally. I mean, Messenger will back me up on this one. The southern culture is very different to the culture of northern England. And even within Northern England, you've got Liverpool, you've got Lancashire, you've got Yorkshire, you've got the people up in Newcastle. They're very different,
and like nobody likes Northumberland, right?
And they all share different histories.
Yeah.
They all have, they all used to be run by barons. England was built through great turmoil, great civil war. I mean, you guys have all seen that film. What's it called? Braveheart. When Scotland wanted independence. Scotland still wants independence. Wales wants independence. Believe it or not, there's a Welsh National Party. And yeah, like I said, the North-South divide, Lancashire, Yorkshire. they had like the War of the Roses when those two families
that was Yorkshire versus Lancashire, right?
Yeah, they were bitter enemies, and even today, even culturally, the sport of cricket it's mainly against the Yorkshire against Lancashire. It's been a long running a rivalry between Yorkshire and Lancashire, and definitely, I mean, the Scottish are very different to the English, very very different, and yeah.
So do you feel that it could be a preclusion to opportunities, especially when it comes to disseminating information? Say as a journalist or a podcaster. So let's say you are, a podcaster out of Kent, and you're trying to get your message out, and you have a lot of important things to say, but somebody from Liverpool or Manchester is just like, oh, that punter from Kent, fuck him, right? I mean, does that happen?
It depends what you're talking about. It depends what the subject matter is.
Okay.
If it's for example about football or about about sport or about some incident like I mentioned earlier, the Hillsbury disaster, or right now I think Grenfell is a big thing. Some people see that as a national disaster. Some people see it as a local disaster.
Mm-hmm.
There is that dynamic. It depends what you're talking about. I mean, was there something specific in your book or specific?
No, not really. I was just like thinking about like trying to take your message, whatever it may be, and trying to get that kind of trying to be heard and maybe gather a following and become somewhat stable in your endeavor while you're living in England. And the thing is that, okay, let's take Tommy Robinson, for instance.
Yeah.
Here's somebody that has been what many perceive to be, his rights of free speech were curtailed or whatever by being arrested. But and we had spoken earlier about that. Well, maybe not so, but either way, if some podcaster out of Kent decided to talk about that, would there be any kind of unity with other provinces within England?
No, I think that people are confused about the topic of freedom of speech and the topic of Tommy Robinson. I think most people, and I like to think good of people. Most people realize, and especially nowadays, that you have to take news with a pinch of salt. You don't know if you've been told the whole story. You don't know if you've been told an accurate story.
Shame.
Absolutely. The topic of freedom of speech is a universal topic. Everybody believes in freedom of speech, but then comes the other issues attached to freedom of speech. Like, can I just start saying lies, saying slander, just start accusing people of stuff?
Right.
I mean,
that's kind of like that's kind of like what I was telling Johnny a couple weeks back. We were discussing the Statue of Liberty. Well, you know what liberty is. Liberty doesn't mean freedom. It means limited freedom. So the Statue of Liberty is a statue of limited. I mean,
yeah.
What do people know? People don't know that.
And to continue on that, when people actually look into the Tommy Robinson issue, they realize that he wasn't prevented from freedom of speech. He was prevented from perverting the course of justice. But like I said, they're now talking about a mistrial because he revealed information about the defendants.
Well, I think what it just comes to show us, and this is a lesson that we all need to remember here, is that, anytime that we see this stuff go on, you always have to be suspect. Anytime there's a big mass thing and it's all over the news and all the alt-right people are coming in, we've established here in the podcast, going back here a minute ago, that we were discussing propaganda. We were discussing the alt-right. We were discussing how these are just nothing more than extensions of mainstream news media. And because of that, You know, it's not to be trusted.
Okay, so people should realize it's not difficult for people to look this up. People should realize now that Tommy Robinson is on the payroll of Zionists. Zionist meaning Israel. So isn't it curious how this just came about during one of the worst massacres in Israeli history? The worst massacres.
Oh
of
man!
unarmed
Wow, this is mind blowing. Wow, I never even thought about that.
Could you say that again, just so that people can make sure you heard that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, isn't it curious that this occurred during one of the worst massacres that Israel has committed against the unarmed civilian population that was protesting at the change of embassy location by Donald Trump, by moving the embassy, the American embassy, to Jerusalem, something that was agreed decades ago. What is it now? 113 unarmed men, women, and children protesting, holding banners and placards.
And this is right when the Tony Robinson thing happened.
Okay, so over 1,000 people, over 1,000 people are injured, 113 dead, and little kids, you know, and chemical weapons were used, white phosphorus.
Oh my God!
Was used on civilians protesting, but because now, but because now Tommy Robinson, he's calling out you know, Pakistani pedophiles. Now it's all right it's now become okay. You know, little babies getting killed, you know, getting gassed in a tent. He's okay now.
I have not made that connection until now. That is mind-blowing.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, Shining. That's very, very important. I think that sums up the whole Tony Robinson thing right there. I mean, so basically what's happening there is that what they did was they played out that event, but they did it in such a way that the public were now involved in carrying on an event that happened back then, except it wasn't all this, you know, they didn't throw gas in the streets, but what they're doing is they're promoting and worshiping that event that happened through.
They made an information shield element. Oh my God.
Jesus. These fucking people are crazy.
Wow. Yeah, Shining. I did not make that connection. Sorry for the interruption.
I'll tell you what's even worse. I'll tell you something that added salt to the wound. The fact that the UN is so it's so, what's the word now? It's so incompetent. The fact they try to roll out a what's it called when they try to press an order in the UN. They try to call for the protection. It's some order. It's something.
Or an edict. Yeah.
But anyway, they said we need to protect the Palestinian people. Every nation agreed. All nations, all the UN attendees agreed to it, except for America. And they stopped. It was just calling upon preventing Palestinian deaths or protecting the Palestinian people.
This segues into the final here, and we'll finish it up with what you're saying, Shining, and we'll go into that just a little bit more before we run out of time here. That, you know, I mentioned on my topic list, I said what we might expect moving forward with the propaganda and the effects of the public from these things like the Tony Robinson issue. Could this be the thing that sparks violence, or more importantly, will people even care or do anything about it? Well, obviously they did something about it, but it wasn't the right action now, was it? It was just the promotion of the very event that you mentioned, which was just like Johnny said, it's mind-blowing.
Allow me just to say this to the people that have fallen for this propaganda. Guys, you have to understand that most Muslims are not brown. Most Muslims are white, or Oriental. There's something like 300 million Chinese, Malaysian, Indonesian Muslims. There's something like 400 million white Muslims.
Dagestan, Russia. Yeah,
Russia. People don't realize during World War II, 40 million Muslims were killed in the Caucasus fighting the Nazis. And that's not to mention the millions of indigenous British and American Muslims.
And many Muslims were Nazis as well.
Yeah, you see, when people think there's this divide against Muslims and non-Muslims, it's a false divide. Muslims are just as diverse as Christians and Jews. Sadly, this is not something I'm saying I'm proud about. The fact is, there's not this allegiance to the Quran and Islam that people think Muslims have. Muslims are just sad. I'm sad to say, are just as messed up as Christians and Jews. That's just the fact.
Yeah, it's all controlled. They're not going to allow people to have something that actually makes something happen. That's not allowed.
If you start attacking Muslims, you will just as if you started attacking Christians, you will unite them all. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, if I said, or if a movement started that saying, "Oh, Christians are all evil; they're all part of this evil death cult," all of a sudden you'll find Christian fundamentalism rising. Yeah, the same with Jews as well. If you start saying, "Oh, all Jews need to be they're all part of a death cult," all of a sudden you start finding Christian, Jewish fundamentalism and.
Same thing with Gnostics like myself. I mean, we have so many sects. We actually have satanic Gnostics.
Yeah,
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, called Theosophists.
Yeah, Theosophists.
I think people should people need to think, and I think they will come to that conclusion, and they will realize that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Violence breeds
something
violence.
that you mentioned there, Shining, that I just realized, and I forgot to put this in, but it just came because you mentioned that. It seems to me that all these religions are all being activated like sleeper cells all at the same time, all working towards one agenda. It's like every single religion in their teachings state that there's an event that's going to happen, and it's like these people are brainwashed and activated like sleeper cells, so that they're all saying the same thing a roundabout way, but they're all pushing for one agenda, and that's for the fact of inciting violence and to end the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, guys, don't get manipulated. Don't get used in the elites war against you. I mean,
yeah.
The best thing you could be is a pawn. That's about it.
With that being, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say, they're not going to give you power. They're not going to give you wealth. You're not going to get more bitches if you wipe out the Jews and the Muslims. All the white women aren't going to come back to you if you get rid of Tyrone.
Shucks.
Tyrone, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I don't have any other things to say. I think, Shiny, you made some excellent points today, and with the topics we've discussed today, I hope people learned something. I hope they've understood the propaganda machine, which is what I'm going to call this hangout, is the propaganda machine, because I think it's suitable. Because I think that's the main subject today.
Great title.
Because it's exactly what all this is about. It's propaganda, and I hope people learned how this works. And the thing is, people, unfortunately, we're always going to have people fall for it, because the main social engineering thing that they do is get people to be motivated by their emotions and by fear. And that is the easiest way to set people off, and that's why we have to understand that we cannot let our emotions, when we're dealing with topics like these and, events that happen in the news, that, freedom of speech, and immediately people associate that with, we need to do something about it without looking at what the agenda is going on here. We cannot let our emotions get the best of us. We must maintain calm and neutral in a state of chaos. And that is, and I think what we mentioned earlier about the state of this world is constant chaos and entropy. Well, how do you defeat a constant state of chaos? Well, think of it this way. An atom is a particle, and when you heat that atom up, things get hot, or a molecule. I mean, when you heat a molecule up, things get hot. Well, what happens when that molecule stays at a state of stasis? Well, nothing happens. There's no chaos. So the best thing to counteract the state of chaos is to be neutral and calm. So, you just have to remember, you stay calm. Don't let your emotions get the best of you, and think things through. Do your research.
You got to keep your mind together. You got to stay calm. You got to keep your senses in line. And as long as you do that, you're going to be good.
And the other thing is there's so much mental insanity going on, and people are just losing their minds because of all this stuff, because of the nature of chaos in general. So we can't let that happen to ourselves if we're going to stay calm and be calm in this stuff, and stay, you know, vigilant, and use our mental faculties and not fall in line with the propaganda that they're trying to incite. And if you can do that, then, you know, you're not going to go crazy, and you're going to be careful about where you put your feet. But with that being said, Shining, is there anything else you want to mention? And Johnny?
No, just that it's been an absolute pleasure being on here. Hopefully, if I can join you guys again next time, I'd like to address the monks, the old guard of MGTOW. I've got some great advice for you guys. I'd also like to talk about some of the disputes that's been going on with some of the men. If we had time today, I would have mentioned some of the stuff that's been going on with Global Man, Traversable MGTOW. But obviously, I wasn't going to mention any names. I was just going to mention some of the ideas and the philosophy and the issues surrounding it. So hopefully, next time, I want to address some of the things that the men are going through individually, and the men as a group, the group of men that run in our circles, that some of the issues that are going on with them. Hopefully,
well, Shani, you put that down on the list, and remember that, and we will absolutely have you on again. So just keep that on the list, so that when we have you back on, you know, we'll have that list, and you'll know what to say. Johnny, is there anything else you want to bring up?
I love his idea, Shining's idea. I think it's a great topic to touch upon. Things are actually changing a little bit within the monk circles. I don't want to call them movements, but yeah, they are. You know, there has been a shift, and well, just to let you know, I'm still a monk. I'm still MGTOW, and I want you all to have a good midnight. Yeah.
Yep. With that being said, again, thank you, Shining, for joining us. We really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. We'll have you on again. And I hope everybody had a good time. Hope everybody learned some things. And we will see you again shortly.